My guest today is Kim Bohr, the president and COO at SparkEffect, and also the host of the podcast Courage to Advance. The focus of Kim's work at SparkEffect and through the podcast is on empowering individuals and organizations to lead with trust and innovation. Kim, it's so great to have you on.
Thank you, Joel. I'm excited to be here.
We talked about this already, but there's so much overlap in our professional circles and our friend networks across HR tech groups. So I'm really pumped to bring you into the network officially.
Same. Thank you. I'm excited.
We're coming up on the holiday break. There's typically family gatherings, family meals that happen. What is your favorite go-to meal during the holiday break? Is it ham? Is it turkey? Is it something else?
Oh, so I grew up with Italian American family. And so every Christmas Eve, we would originally go to other family to have all the feast. And then my mom started to cook it. So this year she's doing it again. And so she cooks lasagna and she cooks these sausages that are just so, yummy. And we have our wine and so it's an Italian American feast that I just so look forward to. And my mouth is watering as I answer that question.
That sounds amazing. All right. I am really excited because you have a new research report that's out that's authored by one of my favorite people in the industry, Dr. Aaron Delgatti. But you have a new study, Trust and Turbulence, and it shows how this cost-cutting trend of flattening organizations and cutting middle managers is actually backfiring for a lot of organizations. I've had a lot of talks with people across the industry over the past couple of years about some of the more long-term impacts of workforce reduction, reorganizations, flattening organizations. But I'm really interested to hear the insights that came up through this study and maybe what was something unexpected that you learned through this study on the impacts of removing this middle management layer and flattening organizations.
Absolutely. So we were really fortunate to have that partnership with Dr. Delgatti and working on creating this and bringing it to life. And we'll do this annually. And so in this first inaugural launch, we found some really surprising things. What set us off, just to set the stage, was we were really curious around what's happening with AI and disruption. And then we started to pan back and say, what does disruption really mean inside organizations? And we started to think about it from the realities. There's personal disruptions and there's professional disruptions, and they're all intermingling. And in any given day, we're having these micro disruptions, whether it's childcare issues, elder care, layoffs, change in leadership, whatever the mix might be. And so when we did this work, we found a few highlights that really stood out. One was that in the last 2 years, 71% of respondents had experienced at least one of these disruptors that we had identified, of which AI was the biggest disruptor, but it was not the biggest breaker in trust. We also found that there became a control group of people who said they hadn't identified with any of those disruptors. And so that became very interesting for us as we started to then understand that we could actually measure the impact of trust on revenue, reputation, and retention. And we found really surprising factors, such as those respondents in really high trust organizations found that the retention of employees was around 93% versus low trust organizations had more like 52%. So we were really surprised with some of those actual strong metrics that were able to emerge, and then what some of the factors, the inputs are that could be controlled when leaders are looking at it a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think intuitively, right, everyone would say trust is important in an organization, but I think it's really important to go a layer on top of that and take what would be a squishy concept and actually be able to quantify that and actually show how that relates to business impact and business outcomes. So that's really interesting that the report is starting to surface some of these areas where you can quantify and measure trust and the impact. Knowing that trust is a huge element in culture and retention and performance, how can companies accelerate trust, right, after they go through this process and maybe eliminate some of that middle management layer and flatten organizations?
Yeah, so one of the things that emerged really clearly was what are those actions that you can take that are trust builders, if you will, and what are trust destroyers? So if we think about it from that lens, and because you think about reorgs that are happening for whatever reason, and we know that's very prominent right now. Things like the builders were things like open and honest communication from leadership during change, thinking about fair treatment and empathy towards employees, opportunities to voice concerns without fear of retribution, right? These seem very commonplace, and yet we see time and time again that organizations just aren't following through with these types of things. Finding visible alignment between what we're doing and the needs of leaders or the needs of employees. From the trust destroyer perspective, we saw things like lack of transparency and uncertainty around what are the trade-offs we're having to make. Thinking about things like perceived misalignment between leadership and what employee needs are. And then things like the reality of system rollouts and IT changes and AI and like how poorly those could be handled. And so what we found was that it wasn't about mitigating risk, because in fact, we saw that organizations that tried to do the right thing actually gained a 12% advantage over those that had not experienced any disruption before, because we had that control group. So the idea isn't about mitigating risk. It's about putting the genuine effort forward of trying to think through this. And I think to your question, what we're seeing is organizations making this, yes, I know trust is important, and they're stopping there. And what we're showing is you can measure it, and like you should be making the connection and building it into your strategy.
I wish we had more time, but this is a very short podcast. So thank you so much for coming on. How can people learn more and get access to this report?
We are always excited to have people connect on LinkedIn. I also want to make just available to your listeners, if they come to sparkeffect.com/HR snacks, we'll have a little ability for them to download the white paper that we did, plus a couple of resources that maybe help them take some of that data and put it into action, especially if they're leading teams. And so I want to make that available to them. And I'm really excited to have been able to have this conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much.